Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode on the Teams for Business podcast, and I'm your host Ivan.
I'm Jack.
I'm Kylan.
I'm Jackie.
And I'm your guest, Siddhant. I'm a senior at Basis, and I like physics, but I end up talking about most things.
So in today's episode, we're going to talk about the recent bankruptcy of Wework, which is founded in 2010 by Adam Newman and Miguel McKelvey. And so the company is a really fast grew startup, and it had a peak valuation of $47 billion in 2019. However, when it went to try to go public, it failed miserably, and ever since then, it hasn't been any good news. And on November 1st, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And the reason why WeWork went bankrupt was its financial situation, as they have accumulated more than $10.7 billion in losses over the past 3 years. And so I can recollect that what our economics teacher in 8th grade was already clowning on WeWork ever since 2019. So yeah, it's been going on a downward spiral ever since. And then the bankruptcy petition listed a total of $18 billion in debt and around $15 billion in assets. And also, due to its business model, these losses add up from all the rents they do. So moving on to some discussion. So how do you guys think has WeWork's bankruptcy impacted the commercial real estate sector, particularly in cities where it has a significant presence? So you want to go first?
Sure. Well, obviously the rise of things like co-working spaces and stuff like that encourage, employees from companies to come to these communal spaces, but I wouldn't say the real estate sector has been particularly impacted. I mean, if you look at classical real estate dealers, they're still perfectly capable of doing the things that WeWorks does, right? Like leasing short-term leases to tenants like companies isn't something that's unique to a company like WeWorks. A real estate developer could easily sell out short-term leases to tenants. So in terms of long-term real estate impact, I would honestly say it's kind of overhyped.
Yeah, and I would say I agree. Like based on its business model, WeWork doesn't like, even though like maybe the owners of the lot skyscrapers they own would suffer some kind of losses, because WeWork is definitely like a major tenant in these office buildings. But overall, it's not like they're renting out like several buildings in like some like Manhattan or something. They only own like a couple of, like a very small percentage of this really big skyscrapers among other tenants. Like we were just talking about like before the meeting, the Salesforce Tower, like they're not like major tenants of these large skyscrapers. So yeah, I agree with Sana and that the real estate market wouldn't be that impacted.
No, but I think my point is that even if they're a small percentage, if these companies lease out real estate to WeWorks, and WeWorks leases it out to individual corporations or employees, there's not really that much of a difference qualitatively between that and Salesforce Tower, for example, being directly leased out to the corporations or employees without WeWorks as like a middleman of sorts.
Yeah, I guess WeWork is basically just like some sort of like, like just startup accelerators. Like just they kind of carry carry towards like people who work on their own, like they're their own, like but they own their own business, but a small business, but they kind of need that surrounding of working with others. That's what their major market is. But that doesn't, it's not really a real estate problem. That's just another business and money problem. And the
Right.
real estate problem is the buildings figure out how to deal with, such a like some sort of tenant leaving without paying its rent,
Yeah.
because they're obviously not paying their rent because they went bankrupt.
Yeah, I think like in terms of like short-term impact, I think there is like some sort of like rental prices will go down somewhat. I think because WeWork is bankrupt, there's gonna be a void that they leave, even if it's like kind of small in the short term. I feel like it will drive rental prices kind of down in the short term while these landlords try to find places to kind of like rent out people to rent out their office buildings to. At least in the short term. I know you guys talked about how in the long term there's not that much of an impact, but I think that is something kind of notable.
Yeah, definitely in the short term, there's increased vacancies that need to be filled up, and thus there needs to be like lower rent for the tenants that need to like fill them up. So like that will definitely occur in the short term for like a few years, but in the long term, I think those like vacancies will be like filled up, so there won't be that much of an impact on the real estate market.
Yeah, I mean, I think also like WeWork, like usually they have like longer leases. And so like, but they started renegotiating some of them in September. So I think like overall, like the real estate sector is still going to be like fine, if that's like the right word, but like it's not like a huge, like incredibly significant presence, because before it filed for bankruptcy, I guess this like happens with any company. It's not like it's doing good and then boom, immediately like it just starts failing. And like there's a period of time where like you can tell like, okay, this is like kind of going down. And like WeWorks was pretty popular 2019, or that's the wrong day, but like towards like COVID era, and like where you didn't have to like go in like all the time. But like once like people started going back into the office, like started transitioning back into full-time office jobs, like we saw trends where it just started like not being as popular. So I like, again, I think like if it were like an immediate like, okay, it's doing really well and then boom, like it failed, I think that would have much more significant impact. But because like it did take time, like, and we did see the trends of like, okay, WeWorks is like not doing so well anymore, I don't think like it's going to have that big of an impact, or like I don't think it's significant is going to be like huge, or like have any like really significant like change to the sector, because it's just like another trend that happens.
Yeah, I just want to add on like one last point, because like this the places that we were kind of rents out is kind of like B2B. Like these skyscrapers are for businesses to put their offices in, not for people to live in. And I think these are two different real estate markets, because one is a very hot market that because people need a roof over their heads. But another one is, companies be like, hey, I have my own office already. Why should I move to this skyscraper? Like I know I'm a growing company, but why should I pay this much more to move into this fancy skyscraper when I already have my own office? So it's like it's a much slower market, that because you definitely need a lot more people, lawyers to convince businesses to move into your office building. And then like I personally know like a lot of stories in like Manhattan where they're trying to build a new tower, um, and then they can't fill these towers, and they ultimately like, get delayed and delayed because they can't find businesses to rent out the building because they're just not willing to. And this market, like even in Manhattan, like such a big place where business is booming, like think about where WeWork has its offices right now. Like even like if they leave, like that market is already really cold. It's not gonna change much, grow much, or decrease much, because that's kind of already what's been the general trend. Okay, and for our next question, I would say, WeWork may or may not continue operations after its bankruptcy. And since we've been talking about its brand image, what do you guys think the future is for this company?
Well, the brand image is somewhat tarnished. It's probably a tough sell at this point, unless they change their name or something. The actual idea is not like completely unviable. I mean, obviously, it's difficult to convince corporations that already have corporate offices to move, but I guess to play the devil's advocate, the selling point is supposedly, the community of working in this sort of communal space, just the general energy of it. But that's a very difficult benefit to quantify, even if it is a benefit, right? And so selling people on that intangible concept of community with an already extremely tarnished brand image is, I think, a very, very uphill battle.
I definitely agree with that. Like WeWork, it's definitely like something that they can like do, but I just don't see how WeWork can do that given how like badly it's gonna take a miracle to get them back, and it needs to have like an expert like strategy. But if without that, I would say there's no chance or very little chance that they can get back up. But we can definitely see another company that could do a very similar thing and in the future and could potentially be very successful with that. But just with how WeWork really like manage how their expansion, they grew like really fast, and in the end they weren't able to like control that growth. So that's led to their tarnished reputation. So now I don't think they can like. There's very little chance that they can get back up.
Yeah, I just think everything from kind of like rebuilding trust with existing customers to seeking out new customers, and they have to like regain confidence in them from like an investor standpoint as well, just to get themselves off the ground and running again. And to do that, they have to like redemonstrate everything from the ground up, like how they're going to be profitable. I just think in terms of getting people to trust them, it's going to be very hard to do that because they already failed once. So that nobody's going to want to put a lot of money into something that hasn't already proven itself, right? So it's kind of very hard for WeWork to continue operations at even like the same level as it was when it was like peaking and it was like really booming. But I think, yeah, it's going to be very hard to just get it off the ground again.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And like the part about its reputation, and I think like it's really difficult to fix a reputation because like Harwin said, if you already failed once, then you lose like a lot of the trust that investors have in you. And like in a way it's like almost worse than like being completely new to the industry because like at that point it's like, oh, like you know, take like a chance, or like a lot of what the other like firms do. But then it's like if you already failed once, it's like not a lot of reasoning to do it. But also I think like WeWorks kind of like relies on the culture of like working in the sense of like during like right after the COVID era, or like, you know, kind of during it, it was like pretty popular that you didn't have to work like full time in the office, and like you could kind of just like go in a few days, and like because of that, that's why like the whole business model like made sense. And obviously like it started before COVID, but like that's kind of where a lot of it became like mainstream to people. And I think like as that's shifting, there's not really as much of a use for that anymore, because I know like a lot of companies are going back to like full-time office working, and like obviously there's still companies who are still doing like the like sometimes you go in, sometimes you don't, but like we're going back to like what it was pre-COVID. But I think it's just like that's because why like we see these trends in like the finances for WeWork. And I think like because of that, it's kind of hard to change, especially since like they can't really control that culture in a sense. And so I think like rebuilding again, like going back to the point, like rebuilding versus building from scratch, like there's like kind of a difference. And like because they already failed once, like they lose a lot of trust and a lot of like possibility of success that they had previously.
Yeah, it's gonna be very hard. Like even back in 2019, WeWork already lost a lot of its reputation, right? Especially like even to eighth graders, like when we were in 2019, like WeWork was already tarnished. And unless they pull some sort of 360 with their brand, like they completely change their brand, completely change the C-suite, and then find completely new investors, I would not say it's possible to get like a turnaround after bankruptcy. But there has been some companies who went bankrupt and then just completely changed everything, like basically build it from scratch. And then it's a very risky venture, definitely, because like you can't really sell your position with the reputation of failing to new investors, right? Because investors want to see consistency, but it has been done before, and it may happen to WeWork, but it's just gonna be a very tough road.
Can you think of examples of companies that went bankrupt and ruined their brand image and then came back?
Well, I've known like people, like companies do change their brand. I don't know if they go bankrupt. They're definitely in a downward trend. I don't think there has been any from bankruptcy, but definitely downward trend, changed their brand image, and they went back.
Sure.
It was like, I think Pepsi would count, right? Pepsi would be like, because they were losing market share to every other soda brand, and then also Coke. And they're like, okay, maybe if we change our brand to like something like young people, and like Coca-Cola is all about old traditions, making Santa Claus, like they're old. But Pepsi was like, okay, we can't compete with that. Like, there's no way competing with Coke. And then they were losing market share. Like, okay, what do? We market towards the young people. Like, if you drink Pepsi, you're young. You're part of the young generation. Like, if you're young generation, you drink Pepsi, and preferably not Coke. And then, so that's some sort of example I would say, like, if you change your brand image, something like that, like geared towards another
Sure,
specific set of market, then it might work out. But like I don't think there's been any examples from bankruptcy.
I mean, who
Wait,
even
no, I think there are a few that I can think of. Like, I think like didn't Marvel like file for bankruptcy a while ago, like a long time ago? And like obviously they're still around today, like part of Disney. I think like a few bigger like companies, like there was a few like car companies, I don't know off the top of my head, I just remember like reading about this, that also came back. But I think those are a little bit different because like sometimes there's like companies that like just get bailed out by the government because like they're just like, you know, like if those businesses fail, then it's like really bad for the general economy. But like if we don't look at those, like Marvel is a good example of how like it filed for bankruptcy a long time ago and then it like came back today. I mean,
I
so I
feel
did.
like oh sorry.
I just like quickly wrapping it up. I just think like it is like really, really hard to come back from bankruptcy, but like not impossible. I just think it's like less likely that WeWork is going to be able to do it.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I just want to give a little bit more info about like the Marvel bankruptcy. Like at the time that they went bankrupt, they were just like focusing on like those like comic books. And then once they went bankrupt and then like came back, they're like, oh, we need to change our perspective. So they like now they started like making all of those like famous movies like Spider-Man and the Avengers that we all know about today.
Yeah, so like basically you need some sort of change, like a very big change for some sort of company
So
like
if
WeWork.
Pepsi pivots from advertising to old people or adults to juniors, and Marvel pivots from
Yeah.
comics to movies, what is your WeWork pivot
I think
proposal?
WeWork would be like instead of like focusing on okay like WeWork like you're basically before it's like individual like oh you come in and then you still have that office environment but you're working on your own thing like your own boss but you're still working as some sort of like everybody's like probably the same, they're working to grow their business, like most of them are probably small business owners, and then like we're just working part of like this group that makes you like okay I'm working with people and I'm probably more efficient now, but like now it's definitely a different environment because people are one used to working at home, and two the people who usually used WeWork before are probably now moving back to the office or their businesses have not done well due to COVID. And so I think something they would do is probably first change that branding to something not modern. It's already I think really modern enough, but something less towards like we as a community, we work together as a community, but something more like something more focused on like growing and developing instead of like just working. You know, like something geared towards startup facility because everything right now is like oh AI, computer science, and then like these are the people who are gonna use WeWork services. Like they're gonna start their own machine learning AI company out of nowhere and then get like several $1 million in funding. And they don't have an office yet, so you're gonna probably okay some sort of office that I don't need to like settle in, but something for the short term. And then they'll probably turn to like something like WeWork. And then so instead of doing WeWork, you can change something like We Thrive or something. I'm not a very creative person in naming, but like you kind of focus towards like that growing, like we grow together. I'm like it's a place for you to grow, for you to find resources, for you to interact with other innovators, and then you move off on your own afterwards. Like something like that, because that's currently what I believe what the market is hot for.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think for like companies that did come back from bankruptcy, like car companies, like Jackie mentioned, I think like General Motors and Chrysler, they did receive like emergency loans from like governments to just kind of like save them in terms of like keeping them afloat. So it's like very different circumstances, and it's like yeah, it's kind of like a miracle that they were able to bounce back and kind of choose a different path to go about conducting their business that allowed them to find future success bouncing back from bankruptcy.
I just want to add on to Ivan's point. I feel like there could be a possibility for WeWork to like bounce back, and it is through like WeWork like around the world and not just like in the US. Like they're obviously the WeWork US bankrupt, but even though they went bankrupt, we have like WeWork India, they're still intact and they're still doing pretty well in India. So we could see like a potential. I'm not entirely sure if this was like really sustainable both for WeWork because WeWork is already like super like tarnished in America, but it's still doing really well like in India and other places around the world. So it could be possible in that sense that WeWork could like bounce back. But that's also but it's also important to note that for WeWork India, WeWork is actually a minority owner in that, and that it is actually the majority owner of WeWork India is actually Embassy Group, which is a company based in India.
Yeah, so I don't know like how important WeWork is to the US economy, so I don't think they'll be getting any bailout soon. But what do you think? What do you think WeWork should change to make it possibly come back after bankruptcy?
Um, I mean, your proposal was interesting, I guess. Uh, I mean, it's not that different from what they currently have though, because the whole selling point is community, right? So
Yeah.
they are essentially already we thrive more than we work. I guess they would have to sort of emphasize that more than they currently do. So, co-working spaces kind of implies the image of, everyone comes and works in parallel next to each other. And, I remember, I think a while back, they used to have things like, free beer for everyone who would come work at these co-working spaces. This was a thing that they phased out because they started running out of cash. I think they phased it out back in like 2014 or 2015. But things like that, maybe less expensive perhaps. But these sort of community building exercises might increase employee satisfaction and therefore might incentivize corporations to fund their employees to come to these places more often.
Yeah. And I think this will, because they didn't fail once, they failed twice.
Oh, they failed many times.
They failed going public, right? And that was a really big thing. And they like boop, went down, and then slowly it was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then now they went bankrupt actually.
Yeah.
So like, even if you do like make these changes, I think it's still very risky. And if you were like a venture capitalist or even some sort of investor, like you see WeWork, like you didn't fail once, you failed twice and even more. And then like it's gonna be a very, very hard sell for me to put any kind of money into that company. So on that note, what do you guys think will hold for the future of co-working spaces, especially because usually it's dominated by WeWork, but now WeWork is out, and then the brand is tainted, and I think the whole market is kind of tainted now. So what do you think is kind of the future for that co-working market?
I mean, there were other corporations involved too, right? There was this IGW PLC or something like that. There's no reason another corporation can't like come take the place of WeWork. But in general, like I said, I see no reason why something like, except for perhaps this community building atmosphere, unless some corporation comes in with that kind of a different angle, I see no reason why tenants like loaners can't just directly get tenants without needing a middleman corporation. Like why, Salesforce Tower, for example, can't directly lease, these floors or these rooms or whatever as co-working spaces instead of people like WeWorks or IGW PLC.
Yeah, I think like it's the main problem is like WeWork was some sort of company that's interested in like that. My entire purpose model was renting out spaces in these skyscrapers, towers, or buildings.
Right. Renting
And-
out spaces that were rented out to them, which again to me always feels a little bit redundant.
Well, like they went in first to rent out these spaces first, right?
Sure.
But like for a company, like when your company go in, and then especially during COVID, like you're going in, and you're like, wait a minute, half of my employees aren't even here the entire time.
Right.
And like, why do I have to expand into this fancy new building
Right.
when I can stay in my smaller office because half of the people don't come in anytime?
Right.
And like even for like large companies like Tesla, Apple, Google, people still don't come in. They're like 3 out of 5 days. Like that's like the largest amount of days I know. Like
Well, I believe Twitter or X or whatever now is forcing its employees to come in full time.
I think X is kind of kind of an anomaly there, but
Sure.
like these big companies don't really need offices. Like if they do need an office, they'll find a way. But I think for Salesforce, like Salesforce, it has Salesforce in it, obviously, but they're not gonna take up the entire tower. And then I think WeWork kind of came in at the exact time, like I want to rent out these places. This is my entire business, right? Renting out and then renting it back out.
Sure.
And then, but like once that leaves, there's gonna be some sort of, as going back, like this is gonna be real estate void. There's gonna be a void there that may or may not be filled in the near future. Like it's gonna be a very hard sell for any company to go in there. Like there's no way Google is gonna go in there. It's too small for them. And then like Google wants their own building, right? And then like if you go look into any mid-sized building, they're gonna say like the pandemic effects are still lingering, especially with like these really high interest rates, whatever going on in the economy. Like the economy's good right now, even though it's good, it's not looking good in the future. And it's like there, it's gonna be very hard to sell for them to expand into any sort of office space. And since WeWork left, I think like some sort of co-working competitor would best take its place because that's their entire market. Like if you don't take advantage of that void, then your business is also doomed to fail. And then likely like the lease level are going to go down because there's not a lot of demand for these office spaces. And then so these companies that kind of compete with WeWork will definitely get advantage of lower lease prices. And so the lower their costs, right? Like that was cost a really big factor in WeWork's bankruptcy. They'll lower their costs by going in these lower cost zones. And then hopefully people will start coming in because they have some sort of different angle than WeWork.
Sure. But the different angle part is the important part, right?
Yeah, different angle, definitely. Like,
just because the lease prices are currently very low because there's this new void from WeWork going bankrupt. If this other company comes in and does exactly the same thing as WeWork, I mean, they're going to expect the same result.
That probably, yeah. You definitely need like, honestly, I think the brand will be the first one to go. Like, if you replace WeWork with like something completely new, like that will do most of the healing work. But probably like 60%, like the solution to kind of reversing that reputation. But it's gonna be the most, but like the rest is gonna be some type of like innovative thinking, like how to keep people coming in. Like obviously it's not going to be a main consumer, it's going to be multiple people, individuals going in, so how to keep those individuals going in. And that knocked me. Keep those individuals coming while like not suffering the same fate as WeWork.
I believe I have to go.
So I just want to like add on to that. I just feel like the market in general is like a bit of it needs a little bit, it's in a bit of an uphill battle in that, because like the culture is like obviously like changed, and we still have people working from home. So that's definitely gonna also like decrease like demand for these like office spaces. So yeah, so just like in those like high rises, there's not that much like demand as there was like before the pandemic. And even if like there is some that is coming back, it will definitely not return to like the pre-pandemic levels for at least a very long time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just like the entire industry was so affected by like the pandemic, and also just like with WeWork's like lack of like with WeWork's downfall, there's going to be companies that aren't willing to trust any kind of company that does what they do. So just like overall, there might be a company that kind of like steps into the market share that WeWork has, but I think the overall market will be kind of smaller just because of the lack of, just I don't think there is a specific need that a lot of companies have for a lot of this co-working space like they did before the pandemic.
Yeah, so one final discussion question, which is how should investors and startups, especially startups, emphasis on the startups, learn from WeWork situation, like from its startup phase where it gained a lot of traction, and then when it tried to go public, it suddenly failed. So like what can startups, like even if it's co-working spaces or like a tech startup or like a manufacturing startup, whatever, how can they learn from this WeWork situation?
Beware hype, I guess. I mean, you should always be somewhat suspicious of companies that grow, very, very quickly, very, very successful in such a short period of time. I mean, if you look at some of the most successful companies today, I mean, Amazon failed to be profitable for what, like an absurdly long amount of time, right? Like 20 years or something. And I mean, in general, when you look at all of these, big bankruptcies that are in the news, like FTX, if you look at, WeWork, and there's the whole Theranos thing. These are people that gained a lot, probably like an unrequited amount of trust from the public for making, very large promises, or just generally having a lot of hype and word of mouth. And so in general, I think startups should, I mean, obviously expansion is something that you need to do as a startup, but perhaps not aggressive hype driven expansion.
Well, I would drive a kind of counterpoint to that. Like for startups, especially like tech startups, there's so many different tech startups that are doing basically the same thing, like AI.
Right.
So like some to discern themselves is to hype themselves up to like VCs and investors because they need to get hype
Sure.
for to donate money because everybody's basically doing the same thing. They're all using the same technologies that are available to everyone.
Sure.
So they need that hype to kind of push themselves out of the startup phase and into that kind of growing phase. So like what you said is like don't overhype. Then how would these companies gain the funding in the first place and survive?
No, don't overhype yourself. Obviously, market yourself, but don't buy into the hype yourself, right? Like, you want to market yourself, but still, you want to tell other people, oh, I'm the greatest company that's ever lived. But you still need to realize your own limitations and not sort of have the hubris of trying to expand at the rate that people think you're actually capable of expanding, which is probably greater than the rate that you are actually capable of expanding.
Yeah.
I think like
Just that.
adjacent, sorry. I think like the adjacent point to that is like you can have like that marketing, have like that branding, but at the same time you need to have like the product going, right? Like you can't just have all this marketing, have like all this, we're so innovative, we're so like the next big thing, but then not have like continuous innovation. Because I think like this was one of the things like people brought up when their IPO failed, was that like the former like one of the former executives there, Newman, like he was kicked off the team because like people were just saying like he was actually just like a showman. He was a lot more about like marketing, like he wasn't actually able to have a product down or like have like the service down. I mean, I think like that's a good point for the future. Like obviously do brand yourself because that is, I guess, essentially how they were able to even become so big. But like to avoid the downfall of them like multiple times actually, like it's important to actually have the product and like continuously innovate and like not just rely on trends like of what happened with like the culture of working from home and then like like not having to work every single day in the office, but like you have to have product that continuously sustains itself even like outside of these external trends.
Yeah, just to add on to that, like it doesn't well, your product needs to be at least like successful, or at least like have some sort of like positive reception for at least like quite some time. It may need like a lot of bit of testing. That could be like a positive reception. The problem with like the startups in here, in this case with WeWork, is that like Adam Newman, like the one of the executives, he like really prioritized the quick growth over like those like initial profits, and that rush to also like go public is definitely like you can't like rush in those like big time circumstances, because that could derail the trajectory of your company, and this is exactly what happened here. So just for future nonprofits and like for future startups in the that like want to expand in the future, definitely just don't like rush with going into like big time decisions. Make sure you have something that's sustainable before you go into like making those like big time decisions. Well, even during that time, it's still very necessary to like market yourself to like potential investors.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add on really quick to what Jack said, I guess prioritizing like real sustainable growth over kind of like rapid expansion that has no like real like path to profitability. You got to have like a very clear and defined like model about how you're going to make money, how like just growing steadily over time is what like startups and investors should be looking for when like analyzing a company that is on its way to success, compared to what WeWork kind of did, where they were rapidly expanding and growing, and you kind of see that and in a lot of bankruptcies.
Yeah, so basically like don't fake your product like Theranos. Right? And don't overhype yourself like WeWork. And then don't steal money from your customers like FTX. And like basically what I think what we need to learn from WeWork definitely is like definitely like hyping is needed, required for startups. Like it's required. Like if you don't hype yourselves up, you're not gonna survive. Like maximum a year. But if you need that hype, but you also need that sustainable growth. Like you hype yourself up, like oh my god, this is like the new market. We just created this new market. Then you actually need to create that new market. You can't just say it, right? And then so like especially for like Theranos, of course it's a fake product, right? But the idea was definitely there. It's just the technology was not. And like it's good to be innovative, but it's also good to be feasible. And I think that's what we need to learn from all these startup ventures that are going on these days. Like especially like these AI startups are getting like almost like billions of dollars worth of venture funding like in like a few months, and that's insane. Like everybody's doing AI. Like they of course learn from the hype they're getting, but also have something to back that up.
I think just the upshot is just short-term profits are not all that profitable, right? Except ironically for the the people running the companies, because I think Adam Neumann, however you pronounce it, Neumann ran off with what, like $2 billion, $1.9 billion after he was supposedly the irresponsible showman. And so ironically, it's in the interest of these CEOs to run these companies into the ground with short-term profits and then walk away. But it's something that I think both the startups and the venture capitalists should be wary of.
Yeah, but like definitely like legally, like if a company goes bankrupt, as long as it didn't do any illegal,
Mhm.
then you like if it was as some sort of success at some point, you're gonna come out with several million, if not billions of dollars, even if your company's into the ground and then everyone else is dying financially, but you're financially well off. Like that if you do want your company to end up something big, you should not have that mindset, I guess. Like you should be one with your company. Like I know like a lot of startups nowadays, which I think is a good thing, is like the CEOs, they want to make the sacrifice. Like they don't take salaries. Like if they do any, if they do at all, they take very little salaries, and just to make sure the company survives. And I think that's the mindset that you can go in. Like especially like WeWork, like of course hype yourself up, make sure your company grows successfully, but make sure that growth is long term, not short term. Like obviously short term is important for investors and VCs, but long term is important for you, the owner, or some sort of big manager in this company. And I think those are 2 points that we need to learn as people who may like startups in the future. Okay, and so I think that's the end of today's episode about the recent bankruptcy of WeWork. And thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of Teams for Business, and I hope you'll see you guys next time.